You're listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. To support this podcast, go to nakedbiblepodcast.com and click on the support link in the upper right-hand corner. If you're new to the podcast and Dr. Heiser's approach to the Bible, click on New Start Here at nakedbiblepodcast.com.
Welcome to the Naked Bible Podcast, episode 116, Ezekiel, chapter 7. I'm the layman, Trey Strickland, and he's the scholar, Dr. Michael Heiser. Hi, Mike. How are you?
Very good, Trey. How was your week?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty good. I just wanted to update everybody real quick, Mike. I was taking a look at the numbers on the podcast, and we've actually quadrupled our listenership over the last 12 months. So Hopefully the next 12 months we can quadruple again. So maybe the Get Naked Bible Podcast, everybody reaching out to their friends. And I know everybody knows that one person they could talk to. I was talking to my friend Jeff. I'm going to give him a shout out. And how when you start talking to people about this kind of content, some people eyes or just gloss over and just, that sounds good, and then you just slowly walk away because you're losing them. But when you hear this content, people come to your mind immediately who you think this content would resonate with. So, we're really asking for those people out there, our listeners, to go find those people in your church, in your family, wherever you are, because I know you have one or two people in mind that would enjoy this content. So let's try to get them on board and do some good things.
Yeah, and that's a good strategy. People have to remember that we have a very clear understanding that what we do here is not for everybody. Frankly, that's just the way I've operated for years. What I do, the things I write, the things I'm focused on, this is not for the average churchgoer. This is not for the average person in the pew. And that's fine. I mean, I'm not aiming for them. I'm not shooting for them. But it's for those, 1, 2, 3, 4, half dozen people that, again, you're going to know in church or your circle of friends who just know that they're not getting fed. They're not getting serious content. You know it. They know it. That's the person we're shooting for, against somebody who, just wants to move beyond or supplement or, replace or whatever, however they perceive it, what's happening in church for them in terms of content. That's the person we're looking for. So that's a good way to approach it.
And also do it for yourself, because you know how frustrating it is when you have nobody else to talk to about this content. I mean, my friend Jeff, over a decade, I was talking about the divine counsel worldview and just going on and on and on and on. And, you can't say too much because you overload people sometimes because there's just so much to it. So imagine just the happiness that yourself you'll get by being able to share and just have a conversation with somebody else about this stuff. So if anything, do it for yourself.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah, your own sanity.
Yeah. For your own sanity, or start a small Bible group, or, approach it that way, because as this ministry is growing, we're really going to rely on our listeners and all of us to champion this. And
yeah, the bottom line is this isn't going to grow without the listener. I mean, it's just that simple. This is a very grassroots, boots on the ground kind of thing. We're not doing crazy stuff to draw attention of, the gatekeepers in the Christian world and all that stuff. Again, it's not our focus. It's not our interest. We're just looking for, again, people who care about content, and that's just it's not going to grow unless listeners, reach out to people and try to get them to listen.
Absolutely. Well, all right, Mike. Well, with that, I'm ready for chapter 7.
Yeah, we're in Ezekiel 7 today. And again, just to situate everyone, to, reorient your mind. The first 3 chapters of Ezekiel, of course, were the call of Ezekiel. Typically that's associated with the first chapter, but as we saw, it extends on into chapter 3. And then we looked at Ezekiel 4 and 5, which right after Ezekiel gets called to ministry, he, delivers, a series of sign acts against Jerusalem and Judah, because again, that's all that's left. The northern kingdom by this time in Israel's history is toast. Literally, it is history. So Jerusalem and Judah are the focus. Of course, Ezekiel was taken captive in the second wave of the demise of Judah as a political, national entity, and that he's back there with the captives, and he's forecasting, well, here, this isn't over yet. Here's what's going to happen, to the city, what's going to happen to the temple. And so he goes through a series of these sign acts. There were 9 of them in chapters 4 and 5 about, again, physically doing things to describe what's going to happen to the city and its inhabitants. And then last time in chapter 6, we sort of got the whole rationale, the cause for why God was so angry with Jerusalem and Judah. Of course, the answer to that was its idolatry. And you'll remember, again, how this was framed. God wasn't so upset with people who were untaught by frankly apostate, disloyal priests. People they're going to be sheep without a shepherd, and so God's going to look at the people who worship incorrectly, even worship another god wrongly, thinking that it's Yahweh or something like that. He's going to look at people who just don't know better differently than he does with the phrase we used last time was state-sponsored apostasy, where you have people who do know better, from the kings to the priests, on down through the bureaucracy, doing things like building high places in Jerusalem, adjacent to the temple. And of course, when you get to Manasseh, actually moving, pagan objects into the temple itself, the holy place. When you do stuff like that, that is sort of the last straw, with God. That's the thing that is going to break the covenantal bond and is going to sort of unleash the curses that we read about in Deuteronomy. And of course, Leviticus 26 was a focus last time, because Ezekiel 6 borrows language from Leviticus 26 about, if you go off and are disloyal to Yahweh and you worship other gods, then, you're going to be driven from the land, and so on and so forth. And this is what's happening. This is what's taking shape, in real time in Ezekiel's lifetime. And again, we could situate that further into, again, what we call the divine council worldview, where God is so offended at that because Jerusalem is his sacred space. Now, you could say, well, the whole land, the land of Israel, is sacred space to Yahweh. That's true, again, in the context of cosmic geography. But Jerusalem, the city, and of course the temple, this was Zion. This was the place of Yahweh's habitation. This is where Yahweh conducts business, with his counsel, to administer the affairs of his people in his land, of course, in his city, his temple, his house. And when you start, again, building, high places and objects of worship and conducting worship on that sacred space, then that is going to be, a clear violation, that you are knowingly transgressing and worshiping other gods. You are no longer in a status of believing loyalty to Yahweh. You are surrendering that ground to other gods. So this is the context, leading into Ezekiel 7. And of course, we've had the rationale for why God is so angry in the previous chapter. Then we hit chapter 7, and it's really, again, just sort of a reiteration of you're doomed. I mean, if you wanted to take the whole chapter and encapsulate it into 2 words, it would be, you're doomed. And that's what we're going to get here in chapter 7. I'm going to read through the first 13 verses and then come back and comment on a few things. Again, what we do here isn't, if you're new, it's not verse by verse, but we take section by section and comment on things that interest me and I think are worth commenting on. So as we jump in here in verse 1 in chapter 7, we read, "The word of the Lord came to me, and you, O son of man, thus says the Lord God to the land of Israel, the end has come upon the 4 corners of the land. Now the end is upon you, and I will send my anger upon you. I will judge you according to your ways, and I will punish you for all your abominations. And my eye will not spare you, nor will I have pity. But I will punish you for your ways, while your abominations are in your midst. Then you will know that I am the Lord. Thus says the Lord God, disaster after disaster. Behold, it comes. An end has come. The end has come. It has awakened against you. Behold, it comes. Your doom has come to you, O inhabitant of the land. The time has come. The day is near, a day of tumult, and not of joyful shouting on the mountains. Now I will soon pour out my wrath upon you and spend my anger against you, and judge you according to your ways, and I will punish you for all your abominations. And my eye will not spare, nor will I have pity. I will punish you according to your ways, while your abominations are in your midst. Then you will know that I am the Lord who strikes. Verse 10, Behold the day, behold it comes. Your doom has come, the rod has blossomed, pride has budded. Violence has grown up into a rod of wickedness. None of them shall remain, nor their abundance, nor their wealth, neither shall there be preeminence among them. The time has come, the day has arrived. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for wrath is upon all their multitude. For the seller shall not return to what he has sold while they live, for the vision concerns all their multitude. It shall not turn back, and because of his iniquity, none can maintain his life. Now, that's the first 13 verses, and of course you notice as we read, there's lots of repetition in it. Specifically, what you have is you have three sort of short mini oracles, judgment pronouncements, that are linked together in these first 13 verses by similar phrases like, the end has come, an end has come, the end is upon you, your doom has come, the time has come, behold, it comes. All this sort of repetition. Really, those phrases that I just, went through, there are 9 or 10 of them in 27 verses. We only read the first 13, so, most of them are actually in those 13 verses. So it raises a question, for commentators and close readers, what's up with this? Why the repetition? And this brings us to an important theme, and I think when we get to the end of our time today, I'm going to sort of run full circle back here and say that this is sort of the payoff point. We get it right up front. The repetition is there because of the belief, and if you wanted to use a negative word, you would say the myth of the inviolability of Jerusalem, of Zion. Now, this is actually a topic that scholars discuss very specifically in Old Testament study, the inviolability of Zion, or the inviolability of Jerusalem. You say, well, what is that? Well, it's the idea that Jerusalem's destruction was just simply inconceivable, that people just didn't think it was possible because of the Davidic covenant. God had promised, this everlasting covenant with the dynasty of David. So how could God possibly destroy us? It also is propelled by the temple. Well, this is where God lives. Why would he destroy his own house? The city of David, that's where the temple is located. I mean, there was this mythology, there was this belief that because of the Davidic covenant, because of the temple, Zion, Jerusalem, would never be destroyed. God just wouldn't do that. He wouldn't go there. And of course, the whole messaging here, I mean, Ezekiel's writing and of course speaking earlier than the writing, to people who had grown up thinking this way, and he has to pepper them with, just so they get the point, so they don't miss it. Your end has come. The time has come. Your doom is here. I mean, he just peppers them with this because if you just say it once, it's not going to catch. If you just say it over and over and over again, it reinforces the point that, hey, you're sitting there thinking, okay, I mean, just put yourself in the situation. We've had 2 waves now of captivity. Nebuchadnezzar has gone down, into Jerusalem. He's taken people out. Ezekiel, of course, went in the second wave. He's left the city standing. He's left the temple standing. He's installed puppet, rulers and leaders, puppet governors there. And so people are like, well, that was bad, but hey, we're still here. Hey, the temple's still here. Hey, Jerusalem's still here. And why? It's here because God will never allow it to be destroyed because of, this theological thinking. And Ezekiel's saying, That just isn't true. It's just not true. Okay, this is not done yet, and worse is yet to come. Now, again, I've referred to this as a myth because it is. God didn't tie his own hands by making promises to David or by deciding to put his presence, to use the Deuteronomy language, to set his name in the city of Jerusalem, in the temple. Okay. When God decides to do these things, he's not thinking, I hope they don't get so bad because I'll never be able to pull out or destroy this place because I'm here, and I don't want my house to get messed up. Again, that's just mythological kind of thinking. But, the people living at the time, again, they are thinking about the Davidic dynasty. They're thinking about their own history, too. I mean, at this point, we're in the 6th century BC. They've seen things like the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem in Hezekiah's time, delivering the city supernaturally from the hands of Sennacherib, the Assyrian. Again, when stuff like that happens, it's going to contribute to this belief that Zion is inviolable. It will never go away. It will never die. It'll never be destroyed. This is just what people expected. And there is, again, some historical reason for them to think these thoughts, but what I'm suggesting is they're not thinking clearly. God's hands aren't tied. But let me just give you a couple examples in the Hebrew Bible of this. If you go to Psalm 46, for instance, just think about what the Psalm says. It says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. That's the whole psalm. I mean, if this is something that you would have heard before many times. Not just in Psalm 46, there's Psalm 48, there's other places that you become convinced. Can I catch what I'm saying here? You interpret your Bible in such a way to think that God will not do X, Y, or Z. You presume to know the limits of a passage. You presume I hate to say it this way, but I will, to filter God through your understanding of some verses. I don't have to, be terribly pointed here. We do this. Again, when we get to the end of our time here, I'm going to be reiterating this, but I hate to say it this way, but many Christians view the church, their church, the nation, America, in these terms. And what I'm suggesting to you, I mean, not only don't I believe that America is the new Israel or something like that, I mean, that's Mormon theology, I guess, that America is the new city of God or something like that. Not only don't I believe that, but look, if we were, it wouldn't give us any comfort because God did destroy Israel. He did destroy Judah. He did destroy Jerusalem. He did destroy the temple. He had, again, Nebuchadnezzar and other foreign invaders go in there and wipe the slate clean because of their apostasy. We're no better than they were. Again, being a citizen of any modern country nowadays, America or anything else, doesn't make you one of the people of God, but we sort of cast things like this. And so I don't want to pick on the Israelites for believing in what really was a myth. God never promised that he wouldn't judge them. In fact, he promised the opposite. Back to Deuteronomy, back to Leviticus. If you turn away from me, I will drive you from the land. I will forsake you. I'm not going to just put up with rival deities being worshipped in my own house. I'm not going to do it. But somehow, again, the people of Judah think that, they'll look at a psalm like Psalm 46 and think, we're okay. We're always going to be okay. It might get bad. God has to do something, but he won't do this. Well, that's just really not good theology. It's really not biblical theology, and all you got to do is look at your Old Testament for it. The innocent do suffer, with the unrighteous as well. So here we go. This is what I want to challenge you to think about as we go through this chapter and pick out a few other things. Is this thinking? Because it's really dangerous, again, to think that God will make an exception for me or for you or your church or in a world, again, back to the divine counsel worldview, if you've read Unseen Realm, this is going to all be familiar to you. Evil exists because God made the decision to allow free will beings, to create intelligent beings as his own imagers, to represent him, whether it be in the unseen world or the seen world. And part of that representation, the tools for representing God, the tools for imaging God, it's not the image, but the tools for imaging, involved God sharing his attributes with us. One of those is free will. And with that comes the risk, the ability. And God wasn't surprised. He knows eventually beings who aren't him, who can make free will decisions, will make mistakes or rebel. Why? Because they're not him. Again, none of this is a surprise to God. God isn't caught by surprise. Oh, I wish I wouldn't have, allowed them to make free will decisions. I didn't see that coming. No, God saw it all coming, but he was committed to it. And when it did come, he didn't scrap the plan. There is no plan B. There's only plan A. He's committed to humanity, again, as his imager. And that's why he has to step in and redeem people. Yes, he has to punish, but there's always redemption. And again, these big theological constructs, but this is why there is evil. And when there is evil, when you have free beings decide to do evil, the righteous do suffer. Okay, people get caught up in the midst of all that. But again, the only alternative to this system, if you want to call it a system, is for God never to have created humanity or any other intelligent being at all. The only way God escapes it is if he is totally alone, because he's the only one that's perfect. Okay, so again, we need to be looking at the wider theological worldview here, and then funnel it into Ezekiel's situation here in chapter 7. And he's just telling people, look, if you think you're the exception, think again. Okay, and he's just laid out the reasons in chapter 6. God is justified by using Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians to do this, because you're the ones that should have known better. Again, back to the whole theme of state-sponsored, state-promoted apostasy. It goes all the way back to Solomon. I mean, Solomon builds high places for foreign deities. And it gets to the point where they're erecting these things right in the vicinity of God's own living space. God's just not going to tolerate that. He doesn't tie his own hands and prevent himself from judging wickedness and from having victory over other gods. And if part of that process is punishing his own people, the people of God, then that's what's going to happen. So again, it's easy to see how they were thinking. Another example, you could go back to Isaiah 7. This is the quote unquote virgin birth passage. And if anybody wants to listen to a fuller lecture on this, you go to my website, drmsh.com, click on the resources tab, and then go to videos, and then go to the one that says Jesus and the Old Testament, number 3. It's a lecture I have about Isaiah 7. I mean, I do affirm the virgin birth, but Isaiah 7 itself is not about a virgin birth. The sign wasn't the sexual status of the woman. The sign was the son, was the child. And Isaiah 7, the terms of Isaiah 7 are actually fulfilled in Isaiah's own lifetime. It's just that later on with Jesus, Matthew sees an analogy between the circumstances of Jesus' birth to what goes on in Isaiah 7, and he quotes that to establish the point, to establish the analogy. Back in Isaiah 7, God wants Ahaz, he prompts Isaiah to ask Ahaz for a sign that Ahaz is going to be protected from his enemies. At the time, this was, Pekah, the governor of Syria, and Remaliah, and again, these bad guys with the northern kingdom and all this sort of stuff. And Ahaz says, well, I don't want to do that. So he tries to act pious, like, oh, I'm not going to ask God for a sign. And God says, basically, God gets annoyed and said, you're just wearying me with this false piety. Okay, behold, the Lord himself will give you a sign. And that's when we get the young maiden, the Alma, will conceive and bear a son, and so on and so forth. His name shall be called Emmanuel. God is with us. And by the time the child, can eat solid food, eat the curds and honey, these enemies of yours are just going to be toast. So, there's a child. We don't know who the child is. We're never told. There are obviously different views, but God says, look, I'm going to do all this stuff to protect you. And why? How does that factor into Ezekiel 7 and the belief in Zion's inviolability? Because God protects Ahaz. The sign was for Ahaz, the king. He is the Davidic heir. He's the Davidic king. If Ahaz dies, the line of David is extinct. So again, the events of Isaiah 7 are going to contribute to this notion. God will always step in and save Zion, save Jerusalem. This is his place. He will not let it be destroyed. And again, Ezekiel's saying, again, through this repetition, that's not really true. Okay, that is not the case. 9 times in 27 verses, but again, most of those are in the first 13 verses. He says, the time has come, the end has come, your doom has come. I mean, he couldn't make it any clearer. He's trying to get the message across. Now, for people who are reading Ezekiel or listening to him, who had read Amos. Again, Amos lived before Ezekiel. He was a prophet to the northern kingdom, which of course is already toast. What's really interesting is that the phrase "the end has come," which is used several times in Ezekiel 7, is only used elsewhere in Amos. It actually, some scholars have argued that it actually comes from the book of Amos. And if that's the case, well, even if it's not the case, even if people would have just heard it and remembered Amos, that would have freaked people out. It would have scared them, because Amos says the same thing right before the fall of the northern kingdom. So that would have jogged in their minds. The last time we heard somebody say that, it was this set of circumstances, and those 10 tribes just are gone. They've been scattered to the wind. So this kind of language should have alerted the people, listening to Ezekiel or reading Ezekiel at the time, whatever form they would have gotten. It would have been listeners, in terms of real time, because, again, this is around 590. It's going to be 4 years or so. The temple's going to be destroyed. So, the material probably wasn't written down by then. But, we get it, and we can, again, sort of do the math. But when they're hearing this, again, they know passages from Leviticus. They know Deuteronomy. They could have had Hosea. They know, again, these stories, or again, in textual form, about how God had protected Zion earlier. And they're making certain theological assumptions in Ezekiel, saying it just isn't the case. You're going to get a really, really rude awakening, in a short amount of time. Now, I want to go back, hit a few things here, and then we're going to go sort of from verse 10 onward. We read through verse 13, but really kind of using verse 10 as our launching pad here, and then moving onward. There are a few interesting phrases that Ezekiel uses to describe the situation. I mean, there, a lot of we've already seen a lot of repetition. There's a lot of repetition that follows. Let me just quickly read the rest of the chapter, verses 14 through, I think it's verse 27. And again, you're going to get more repetition. A lot of this is self-explanatory, but there are a number of phrases and terms that we don't really pick up on well that, again, fit into the sort of theme that I've been talking about. And that's where I want to camp for the rest of our time here. So again, first 13 verses, Ezekiel said, your doom's coming. It's just going to be awful. The whole multitude is going to be under judgment. Then he says in verse 14, they, again, the people who are the objects of wrath here, they have blown the trumpet and made everything ready, but none goes to battle, for my wrath is upon all their multitude. The sword is outside. Pestilence and famine are within. He who is in the field dies by the sword. Him who is in the city, famine and pestilence devour. And if any survivors escape, they will be on the mountains like doves of the valleys, all of them moaning, each one over his iniquity. All hands are feeble, and all knees turn to water. They put on sackcloth, and horror covers them. Shame is on all faces, and baldness on all their heads. They cast their silver into the streets, and their gold is like an unclean thing. Their silver and gold are not able to deliver them in the day of the wrath of the Lord. They cannot satisfy their hunger or fill their stomachs with it, for it was the stumbling block of their iniquity. His beautiful ornament, can you catch that phrase? His beautiful ornament, that's a reference to God's ornament, Yahweh's ornament, they used for pride, and they made their abominable images and their detestable things of it. Therefore I make it an unclean thing to them, and I will give it into the hands of foreigners for prey, and to the wicked of the earth for spoil, and they shall profane it. I will turn my face from them, and they shall profane my treasured place. Robbers shall enter and profane it. Forge a chain, for the land is full of bloody crimes, and the city is full of violence. I will bring the worst of the nations to take possession of their houses. I will put an end to the pride of the strong, and their holy places shall be profaned. When anguish comes, they will seek peace, but there shall be none. Disaster comes upon disaster. Rumor follows rumor. They seek a vision from the prophet, while the law perishes from the priest and counsel from the elders. The king mourns, the prince is wrapped in despair, and the hands of the people of the land are paralyzed by terror. According to their way I will do to them, and according to their judgments I will judge them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Again, not a pretty picture. Like I said last time, we're going to get used to this kind of thing in Ezekiel. But let's go back, and I'm actually going to go back even further to verse 10 and just pick up a few things that I think are interesting, that are easy to miss, or again, just things it wouldn't really catch our eye. In verse 10, there's a particular word here, doom, that is interesting. It's actually also used in verse 7. In Hebrew, it's sephirah. And it's only used in one other place, Isaiah 28:5, where, let me just read that verse. It says in Isaiah 28:5, in that day, the Lord of hosts will be a crown of glory and a diadem of beauty to the remnant of his people. Now, sephirah, again, this word that in Ezekiel, the ESV translates doom, is the word that Isaiah 28:5 has as a diadem or a crown of beauty. So how can the same word, again, here we have in Isaiah this description of a crown, maybe it could be a metal crown, it could be a garland of something, around someone's head, but it's a positive image. Whereas back in Ezekiel, why would we translate it doom? Well, a lot of people have sort of picked up on this apparent disconnect, and there are a number of scholars that think we would be better off here, instead of translating it doom, something like this. Back to Ezekiel 7, verse 10. Behold the day, behold it comes. Your chain has come. In other words, capturing that idea of this ring, that can be put around something. So maybe a chain or a leash or some kind of, thing that binds, maybe a rope or something like that. So a lot of scholars would disagree with the way ESV has this. Again, I'm using the ESV. Your doom has come, and if it's a reference again to a chain, well, that means your bondage has come. Okay, it would be a metaphor of bondage, and of course that's going to fit the context. So in my judgment, it's probably a good solution, a good way to understand this term, but it's not the kind of thing that would sort of pop up in our heads. And the reason I mention it is because of what follows it. You have your chain or your leash, your bondage has come. I'm correcting the translation now. And then we have the rod has blossomed. Well, that typically takes people mentally, a budding rod, that takes people mentally back to Aaron's staff. But if you think about that, that doesn't make any sense either, because that was, again, another positive image, Aaron's staff budding. That was a sign, if you remember the story. That was a sign of that God approved of Aaron as the high priest. It's sort of the sign of Aaron's election as high priest. It wasn't a symbol of doom, and it wasn't a negative symbol at all. So again, scholars have looked at this doom word and said it's not really doom. It's probably something like a chain. It denotes bondage. So that means it would make sense here. And of course, it's the same kind of ring imagery back in Isaiah. So that looks good. But this whole rod thing, I mean, that evokes a positive image when really the context declares something negative. And so if you look at the word rod in Hebrew, and if you know a little Hebrew, you might be able to guess what it is here. It's mateh. It's mem, tet, he is the lemma, mateh. Scholars have proposed, well, there's another word in Hebrew with the same consonants but different vowels, muteh. And that, again, occurs elsewhere in Ezekiel 9:9. So Ezekiel uses that word a little bit later, muteh. And that word means injustice, okay, or guilt. So it's probably best to change the pointing, change the vowels on this Hebrew word so that it makes sense. So it's a negative image. Now, let's go back to verse 10. Behold the day, behold it comes. Your bondage has come. Okay, injustice, guilt has blossomed, pride has budded. Now all three of them make sense together. They're all three negative images. The terminology makes sense in the Hebrew text, so on and so forth. If you remember back to the very first episode of Ezekiel when we introduced the book, I mentioned we're going to get situations in the book where we're going to have to do a little text criticism. We're going to have to, kind of look at the text and see what's going on there. And again, occasionally, amend the text. In this case, change the vowels so that it makes sense. Or again, go try to use cross references to make sense out of a particular term. That's just what you have in Ezekiel. There are a lot of things like this that happen. This chapter, by the way, if you have Block's commentary, he makes the comment really early on in this chapter that this chapter is kind of a mess. For this sort of thing, there's lots of these sorts of problems, interpretive problems in it. I'm only picking out a couple, again, just because I think they're interesting, things that you might, wonder about. But Ezekiel's just full of that sort of thing, where you have to do some evaluation here and actually look at, the text and try to, figure out, well, what else might it mean? What might it say? The other, advantage to this is if you look at, again, if you try to, come up with some way to keep these things in context, again, a negative context, it fits with verse 11. You have here, your bondage has come, injustice has blossomed, pride has budded, violence has grown up into a rod of wickedness. There you have rod of wickedness. Certainly we can't have the blossoming or budding rod of Aaron in parallel to rod of wickedness. It just doesn't make any sense. But a rod of injustice and a rod of wickedness, well, that makes perfect sense. None of them shall remain, nor their abundance their wealth, neither shall there be preeminence among them. And basically, Ezekiel's saying, look, things have come full circle here. Your iniquity, your apostasy is sort of tip-top full. And because of that, your bondage is right around the corner. The time has come, verse 12, the day has arrived. Again, you're going to get what you deserve. And if you're wondering if you deserve it, go back to chapter 6. Yeah, you deserve it. You keep going in verses 12 and 13. We have this phrase, let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller mourn, for wrath is upon all their multitude. For the seller will not return to what he has sold while they live. Basically, it's going to be so bad you're not going to really care about your business. You're not going to be in a situation where your livelihood can reset. You're going to lose everything, and you're going to know it. He's describing really economic devastation. I mean, life will never return to the way it was, at least for your generation. This isn't something that's just going to blow through Jerusalem, and then it's like you pick up the pieces and you start all over again. No, it's going to be worse than that. I actually like what Block says here. He has a paragraph about this little section, the phrases. I'm going to read it to you. This is from the first volume of his Ezekiel commentary, right around page 259, 260. He says, the devastating economic impact of Yahweh's day of wrath is vividly illustrated in verses 12 and 13, and then returned to again in verse 19. The collapse of the economy will be total, rendering all business transactions futile. The buyer will have no time or motivation to rejoice over the good deal he has made, nor will the seller regret that he has parted with his treasured possession. In fact, in a grim parody, now catch this, in a grim parody of the ancient laws of Jubilee, the prophet declares that patrimonial property that has been lost to the family will not return. The year of Jubilee will be canceled. Even though both parties to business transactions are still living, any legal procedures to reclaim lost property will be forestalled by the inevitable and irrevocable day of Yahweh. In short, buying and selling, celebrating and mourning business deals will be irrelevant in this environment where the economic infrastructure has totally collapsed. In the event, the people will fall victim to their own iniquity, with all their props knocked out from under them. Indeed, to borrow the image of Isaiah 24:2, the wrath of Yahweh will prove the great equalizer. When he is through, the entire population, people and priest, servant and master, maid and mistress, buyer and seller, lender and borrower, creditor and debtor, will have been reduced to the lowest common denominator. That's a great paragraph, and it really captures what Ezekiel is saying here. In a nutshell, this is going to be so bad that nothing you have experienced prior to this time, except maybe bondage in Egypt when you were all slaves and you didn't know anything, nothing that you've experienced is going to be like this. There will be no reset for this generation. Your bondage is imminent. Okay, you will be destroyed and carried away, and just you're going to lose everything. So Ezekiel's trying to really use dramatic terms and repetition, again, to just keep beating this into their heads about what's going to happen. Let's go to 14, verse 14. I'll read 14 through 18 here again. So after all that bad news, we read, They have blown the trumpet and made everything ready. But none goes to battle, for my wrath is upon all their multitude. The sword is without, pestilence and famine are within. He who is in the field dies by the sword, and him who is in the city famine and pestilence devour. And if any survivors escape, they will be on the mountains like doves of the valleys, and all of them moaning, each one over his iniquity. All hands are feeble, and all knees turn to water. They put on sackcloth, and horror covers them. Shame is on all faces, and baldness on all their heads. That's 14 through 18. Now this section, if the earlier section was sort of the economic impact, Block uses a phrase that he talks about the psychological impact of this next section. And really, if you look at it, that's kind of evident. They're essentially, there's sort of an emotional paralysis. They blow the trumpet, everything's ready, like they're ready to defend the city, but nobody goes to battle. It's as though they look at what's staring them in the face, and they just lose heart. They just know there is no way out. They hear the watchman's trumpet. Ezekiel uses the watchman metaphor a lot, to alert the people of, hey, the Babylonians are coming. And they've made preparations to defend the city, but when it's time to defend the place, they're hopeless. They are in a state of hopelessness. They can't do a thing. If they attempt to flee out into the field, they're going to get killed with a sword. If they stay in the city, siege warfare of the day we've talked about before, where not only would like the Assyrians, they would use things to scale the city and knock down the walls and puncture holes in there, go in and get people. But a lot of siege warfare would take weeks and months. They would surround a city and literally starve the people out. They would burn the fields outside the city. They would destroy the food. They would cut off water supply if there's water going into the city. Of course, you can't just go out and get water because you're going to get killed by the enemy soldiers. You're going to die. You're going to die of thirst and hunger. And of course, there's no way to dispose of waste outside the city. You're going to have disease. Siege warfare was a terrible thing. If you were caught in the midst of it and you couldn't get out. And that's what Ezekiel's describing here. A couple of interesting, turns of phrase here. The hands are feeble. That's kind of, self-explanatory. Your physical power is spent. You're unable to respond. The more interesting one, though, is knees turned to water. Now, Block and others, again, maybe one of these episodes on the podcast, we should do an episode on, for lack of a better term, scatological language in the Bible. The euphemisms that are used for bodily functions, to sort of make them less coarse. This is one of them, and again, Block isn't the only one, but other scholars have commented on this phrase, this language. Block says basically the phrase means all their knees will run with urine. In other words, they're going to pee themselves. They're going to be this frightened and this hopeless. That's what's going to happen. Block says the prophet is hereby referring to the loss of bladder control that occurs in the moment of extreme crisis. Ezekiel's expression recalls a Neo-Assyrian description of fleeing enemies. Here's what the Assyrians wrote, quote, "Their hearts beat like that of a fledgling dove chased away, and they passed hot urine," unquote. And you can be sure the Assyrians love to write stuff like that because, again, they're the Klingons of the Old Testament. They're going to record stuff like this, the effect that their presence had on a population or a city or a people literally going down in flames. And this is, again, a similar phrase to what is found in that inscription and other sources as well. They're going to pee themselves. I mean, Ezekiel's very fond, as we said last time and before. Ezekiel's sort of known for being the book where a lot of this kind of language is used, a lot of earthy, coarse, scatological, off-color, sexually explicit, especially when you get to like chapter 16. Ezekiel has a lot of this stuff in it that's sort of disguised not only by English translation, but even in the Hebrew text, they will use euphemisms for some of these things. But it's a pretty dire picture. Moving on to 19 through 24, again, we've had an economic impact, we've had psychological impact description. 19 through 24, it should be kind of obvious that here we get into sort of the spiritual reaction. They cast their silver into the streets. Their gold is like an unclean thing. Their silver and gold are not able to deliver them in the day of wrath of the Lord. They can't satisfy their hunger or fill their stomachs with it, for it was the stumbling block of their iniquity. That's verse 19, or verses 18 and 19, verse 19. And again, the whole idea is, well, the silver and gold, yeah, it could refer to wealth, but when it talks about they're unable to satisfy their hunger with these things, or the silver and gold is not able to deliver them in the day of wrath of the Lord. While it could refer to, they can't bribe their way out of this, a lot of scholars think this refers to idols. In other words, the idols that were made with silver and gold, those idols can't save the people. And the people can't eat them. Okay, they're going to starve. They're basically no good at all. And the rest of the passage, sort of tips interpretation in that direction, because verse 20 it says, his beautiful ornament they used for pride, and they made their abominable images and their detestable things out of it. Therefore I make it an unclean thing to them. I'll give it into the hands of foreigners for prey. I mean, God, all these precious idols that the Israelite state, the apostate priests and the kings or whoever, treated as sacred objects, and they assigned it sacred space, and they did rituals for it. They had to purify themselves to be in its presence. God says, I'm going to bring foreigners in here who they're going to treat this stuff that you thought was sacred like garbage. Okay, because that's what it is. That's really what it is at the end of the day. I will bring in foreigners here to profane the things that you assign sacred status to. They can't save you. They can't do a blasted thing for you. Now, the curious phrase here is his beautiful ornament they use for pride. Now, right here around 590 or so, BC with Ezekiel. And so the question is this a generic reference to taking the treasures of the temple, the treasuries, the silver and gold that was, kept in the temple precincts? Is it, that was given over to Yahweh? Is it a reference to taking that and fashioning idols with it? Well, it certainly could be, obviously. I mean, that would make sense. You melt down the silver and gold, that was stored up in Yahweh's house, and you make idols with it. For instance, later on in Ezekiel 16, we're going to read this, verse 17. You also took your beautiful jewels of my gold and of my silver, which I had given you, and made for yourself images of men, and with them played the whore. Now that's a reference to, that's using sexual imagery. Again, Ezekiel 16 is known for its sexually explicit stuff. Basically, you made phallic objects, male phallic objects, and screwed yourselves with them. I mean, that's what he's saying in Ezekiel 16. And so it could be because the people of God are described as the bride. The bride is the one that commits whoredom with these objects. That's why you have the female to male language in Ezekiel 16. And we'll eventually get there. Won't that be a memorable episode? But, at the very least, because of a parallel like Ezekiel 16, it may refer to taking the silver and gold, making idols out of them. Okay. There are some that wonder, though, his beautiful ornament. There are some that wonder, well, could this refer to the Ark? The Ark of the Covenant? I mean, if you're one that thinks that the Ark of the Covenant survived the Babylonian invasion, I won't say that that's not possible. Again, but you've got to have a textually based argument, not something that comes from Indiana Jones. Okay, I think it is possible. Be a whole episode to talk about theories of what happened to the Ark, but the reason why scripturally it may be unlikely actually comes from Jeremiah 3. Jeremiah 3:16 says this. Again, Jeremiah speaking before the Babylonian invasion. He's living right when Nebuchadnezzar comes for the last time. He says, when you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land in those days, declares the Lord. He's talking about returning to the land. It shall not come to the earth. Let me back up. When you have multiplied and been fruitful in the land in those days, declares the Lord, they shall no more say, people shall no more say, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind or be remembered or missed. It shall not be made again. Okay. Now that verse suggests that in conjunction with the last invasion of Nebuchadnezzar, that the ark was destroyed. It didn't survive. If it survived, you wouldn't be talking about making it again, making a new one. So again, I realize this doesn't jive with the Book of Indiana Jones. And hey, I like the movie like everybody else. And I love getting into the theories of what happened to the ark. I mean, I've been there, done that a number of times, and it's fascinating. And you could make a good case for ark survival at least on one or two trajectories, but this verse gets in the way. Jeremiah 3:16 gets in the way because of the language that's used here. So you have to deal with that. So if you take this back to Ezekiel 7, my beautiful or his beautiful ornament, could it refer to the ark? Is it an oblique reference to the ark? Well, we don't know ultimately. If it is, wouldn't that be awful? They took the ark, melded it down, and made idols out of it. I mean, that just think about that. it would be a terrible thing. And so, when God says, hey, I'm going to bring, in verse 24, I will bring the worst of the nations to take possession of their houses and put an end to the pride of the strong. And, they're going to profane, all your sacred objects. Well, again, you get a little bit of an idea for why that's justified. Lastly, in verses 25 through 27, we read this. When anguish comes, they, again, the people who are under attack, being taken into bondage, they will seek peace, but there shall be none. Verse 26, disaster comes upon disaster. Rumor follows rumor. They seek a vision from the prophet. Block translates this, they will demand a vision from the prophet, which I think does capture it a little bit better. Hey, prophet, do something for us. Give us a vision about how we're going to survive. And, remember the inviolability of Zion. And this is God's house. And come on, speak up. It's not going to happen. They will demand a vision from the prophet. Instruction, or the law, the word there, for translated law in ESV is Torah. Instruction, law perishes or will vanish from the priest. The priest isn't going to know what to tell you. It's not go out and do a few, Hail Marys or a few, this or that ritual and it'll all be okay. God will relent. The priest is going to have nothing to say. And neither will there be counsel from the elders, your quasi-religious political leaders, your advisors to the king. There is no solution. Don't look for any, is Ezekiel's saying. Okay, there is no solution. There is nothing that is going to dissuade God from doing what he needs to do here and what he's going to do. So there's no use in appealing to spiritual authorities for intercession. What can we do to make God relent? Short answer, nothing. And there's no sense in appealing to political leadership or even your fellow citizens. Who's going to help you? Short answer, nobody. Again, this is the message of chapter 7. And again, as we wrap up here, I think the real takeaway for us, it really is twofold. I mean, I harped a little bit upon the inviolability idea. Before we sort of snicker or look down on the Israelites, well, how could they have been so foolish to think that Zion was inviolable, that God would never let it die, that God would never let it be destroyed? Is probably a better way to say that. That God wouldn't touch it because he was associated with it. And before we're too quick to sort of snicker at them for that misconception, do we think the same? I mean, honestly, do we? Do we think the same thing about the church here in America? And again, America is the last best hope. I mean, I believe that. I think it's the best country in the world. I think there are a number of fundamental things that separates us from every place else. But America is not the kingdom of God. It's not the new Israel. I mean, Jesus couldn't have been clearer when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." Okay, America is of this world, so by definition, it can't be that. Again, it's very simple. But we tend to think of ourselves, because we have been so blessed, by God, and this has been a place where the gospel can flourish, where there's freedom. And all those things are wonderful and shouldn't be taken for granted. But the fact that they exist is not an argument that they will always exist. The fact that they exist isn't an argument that we have special, divinely sanctioned status from on high. The hand of God is always going to keep this country as it was or as it is. There is no such guarantee. There wasn't for Israel, and there isn't for us. There isn't for our church. Again, even if you have a good church, even if you weren't part of the state-sanctioned apostasy of Israel, people who were godly still suffered because of what the ungodly had done. And again, I don't think it takes much commentary to think that, boy, this really isn't that far from where we're living now. I mean, because you look around and for all the wonderful things that we can cite America for, we are living in a frankly godless nation. I mean, we have turned the corner. You know, our leadership is just hell bent. You know, the Gadarene rush to any perversity or point of ungodliness. If they see it, they're chasing it down and glorifying it, sanctioning it, making it a virtue. That's the nature of the country in which we live. And, you know, it shouldn't be that way. I don't want it to be that way. You know, it would be wonderful if it wasn't. And yeah, you know, it's worth defending, you know, to get it back to a place where, you know, we don't have to think those thoughts and we don't have those realizations. But the bottom line is this is a human creation. Our country is a human creation. You know, we're blessed to be here, as we could be a whole lot of other worse places. But we need to start thinking about the distinction between the kingdom of God, the thing that is eternal. Okay, that thing which is eternal. That thing where Jesus said, look, don't fear those who are able to kill body, to kill the body, you know, to destroy the body. Fear the one who is able to destroy the soul, you know, what's eternal and what isn't. And again, this is why, you know, in a number of other contexts, even in my fiction or whatnot, I'm trying to get people to start thinking about, look, if we lose, you know, the freedoms that we have, if things get tough for us, if we fall under, if the righteous suffer because of the apostasy and the evil of our leadership, whether that be in political circles or within our own church. And boy, trust me, we could have a long conversation about that one too, about the apostasy within the quote unquote believing community. If the righteous suffer because of those things, how do we still carry out the Great Commission? How do we still do the things we're supposed to do, that God wants us to be done, or wants us to do? You know, how does the church flourish, you know, under persecution and awful circumstances? It does. You know, in our own day and age, we could point to the third world or Africa or China, Soviet Union, the underground church. It's booming. Okay, it's bursting at the seams. How does that happen? And again, I think we need to start thinking about what is eternal, what is the kingdom of God, and what is lesser, what is on a lower pedestal. And again, bless God that we have the freedoms that we do, and hopefully they will be sustained. But if not, again, we do have a higher thing to aspire to, and we have membership in a greater entity than, you know, our own country, our own political system. You know, we are members of the kingdom of God. And even if we suffer, you know, loss of life, whatever, God still remembered the godly of his people in these circumstances back here. You know, he was just warning them to tell them, look, apostasy will be punished. There will be a cost. But at the end of the day, the Lord knows who's righteous and who's not. The Lord knows who are his, those who are his belong to him, and those who don't. So I think, again, this is a chapter in Ezekiel that can help kind of straighten out our thinking, get us focused on the things that are eternal versus the things that aren't.
All right, Mike. Well, I'm going to hold you to that about doing a whole show about the theories about what happened to the ark.
It's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's fun. Who doesn't like that?
Stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. I'm not one that adheres to the Tanis view that's in the movie, but I think they're actually more interesting views.
Well, I'll look forward to. I'm going to mark that down. I'm serious. We're going to do a whole show on that. So,
we should.
Yeah, keep that on the radar. So
you like that one even more than the scatological language? I'm surprised, Trey. You're the one that's doing the Get Naked Bible podcast.
Well, one's language and one's an adventure, right? I mean, it's treasure hunting. So they're both good, and we should do both. So let's mark that down and let's hold ourselves to it. So, all right, Mike. Well, next week we're going to do 2 chapters, 8 and 9, correct?
Yeah. Yep. Ezekiel 8 and 9.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add to the show?
No.
Okay. Well, we appreciate it. With that, I just want to thank everybody for listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Naked Bible Podcast. To support this podcast, visit www.nakedbibleblog.com. To learn more about Dr. Heiser's other websites and blogs, go to www.drmsh.com.